Hello and welcome to Group Chat. I am Justin Verrier, and joining me as always, Rob Mahoney, Big Waz. We are here on, what is it, day 4 of NBA free agency? Do we count Sunday as a full day? If anything, this just feels like we're pretty much over at this point, Rob, which is a very strange feeling at this point.
Especially when day 1 got off to such a slow start. But turns out days 2 and 3, and even into the morning here of day 4, have been quite active.
Also, it still feels strange to be doing free agency news not from Vegas, right? Like, because that used to be the thing. Like, it was happening concurrent with the beginning of NBA Summer League, and now Summer League gets to be its own entity, and free agency also free agency being wrapped up by the 4th. Remember when NBA porters used to complain about having to work, look at their phones and scarf hot dogs at the same time?
Why would you say this out loud? All the shit is going to go down. You just jinxed us on 2 fronts. We were hoping to have a peaceful, enjoyable summer league, and now we're not because something ridiculous is going to happen. And now I can't even enjoy my July 4th because you just jinxed the hell out of this thing.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say, reporters still complain about July 4th. And if nothing happens on this July 4th, they will complain about the last time they had to work on July 4th. That's just how this works.
That is fair. That is fair.
But yeah, it's been an interesting offseason thus far. Obviously, the period where teams were allowed to negotiate with their own free agents kind of took a lot of stuff off the board here. But I'm in the place now where enough has happened, where I think it's fair to start wondering about certain teams that are having pretty perplexing off seasons. So I want to first kick it off here with a bunch of teams that I'm calling the what's going on here teams. I really workshopped this and came up with a very creative solution here. But there's a lot of teams where I'm like, what's going on here? And so that's what the bit is.
Isn't that true of most teams? Aren't you kind of looking at most teams sideways and going, we sure about that? What's going on there? Well, how are you approaching the apron? There's a lot of curiosity going around. I'll put it that way.
Yes. And I think maybe some of it could be because of the apron. Maybe like we're just not used to the rhythms of when and how these things are going to happen. But yeah, there's just like a lot of perplexion, I would say, out there. Is perplexion a word?
I don't think so, but we're going to give it to you.
Perplexity? All right. Well, we got to start with the Lakers first and foremost, who before we came on here signed LeBron James to a 2-year maximum contract. He did not get any of his preferred mid-level exception candidates. Once Jonas Valanciunas was off the board, he decided to take the money, it seems like. In addition, so 2 years, $104 million, got a player option there. So it is a typical LeBron 1+1 throwback. He got a no trade clause on top of that. And so we got a lot of beautiful social graphics suggesting that the only 2 players in the NBA right now with no trade clauses, LeBron James and Bradley Beal.
Of course.
So, which is, I guess, pretty appropriate considering that LeBron James, one of the foremost players in the NBA, and Bradley Beal, the shining example of probably the second Abram and all the other consternation
max
to come
contracts, all of that stuff. He is the shining example of some of the quirks of how we pay people in the NBA.
He is a shining example of a guy in the NBA. That's for sure.
That's true. So, as it stands right now, the Lakers have done nothing except bring back last year's team plus their draft picks. I think they also signed Max Christie, a guy who's done, let's be frank, virtually nothing in the NBA. So they've maintained the young core, which I guess you can call just a grouping of young players. I don't know if they're particularly good young players, but on top of that, Rob, the Lakers, as it stands right now, when we're recording this at 9:43 Pacific time AM, are about $1 million into the second apron.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, what's going on here with the Lakers?
I think they're more or less running it back, to be honest with you. The one variable there is what happens with D'Angelo Russell, who there have been reports suggesting he may not be long for the Lakers, that there's some trade possibilities that the team might explore. I'm looking around the league and trying to figure out what those destinations are and not seeing a lot of obvious candidates, especially when you think about what would actually allow the Lakers to shed salary while trading D'Angelo Russell. That's a tough combination to find, much less teams that are just champing at the bit to get D'Lo on their roster. Otherwise, I kind of think this is what you got. And LeBron signing for the 2-year max or the 1+1 max takes the full mid-level off the table. As you said, Jonas was gone. But beyond that, as we talked about in the last pod, they're just like a limited number of actual needle movers for the Lakers in the first place with that slot. And so this is what you end up with. More or less the same team. Reasonable people, a.k.a. me and you, can disagree as to Max Christie's merits. I actually like that signing. Like them bringing him back.
Too.
Think he's going to be a good player. But otherwise, I think they're counting on JJ Redick to clean some stuff up, to get some of the low-hanging fruit, to make the team a little bit better. And otherwise, just kind of hoping and praying that AD and LeBron can stay as healthy as they did last year, that everything can work more or less as well as it did last year, and go from there.
I think the only reason we're kind of confused by what the Lakers did is because every offseason and every trade deadline, the media convinces itself that the Lakers are going to make a big-ass move. And it has not happened basically since Russell Westbrook. And I think that's for a reason. I think they learned some lessons from the Westbrook situation. And yes, they could, at the deadline this year, again, trade a bunch of future picks and make a big swing. But, the fact that they haven't done any of this stuff shows, what direction they're in. There have been reports that they offered more money to Klay Thompson than Dallas did. Those reports are true. So they did legitimately want to try to get Klay Thompson in there. But even that, you can't consider that to be some move that makes the Lakers closer to being as good as the Thunder, the Nuggets, the Wolves. No, nobody thinks that.
Well, closer, incrementally closer, if not meaningfully closer.
Sure, incrementally closer, sure.
It's better to have Klay Thompson than not to have Klay Thompson.
Right, in the sense that putting on my sneakers makes me almost as tall as Shaq, right?
Correct.
It's just not actually true. I think this is who the Lakers are. They had to bring LeBron back, duh. Made all the sense in the world to bring him back at his number. They couldn't just afford to let LeBron just leave over a contract. And they desperately needed this guy to be back. He's still clearly their best player. But in terms of the moves they could make, they're hamstrung by the fact that their best player is 40. Okay. And they have no mechanism to make this way better than what it is. So they're playing out the string of the LeBron era. And I guess we're just conditioned to think they should be trying to win a championship as soon as possible, blah, blah, blah. But there's no realistic way of making that happen. You could take a moonshot and mortgage your future, but it would make no sense to do so.
Yeah, I guess I'm perplexed probably because they're leaning into the youth movement and the developmental track is almost as extreme as going the Russell Westbrook route is going for the big swing trade. There isn't some sort of marginal upgrade that they've made at this point, which I think would be reasonable. For instance, we talked about, hey, maybe trading for a Dorian Finney-Smith, etc. Let's just improve on the fringes here, because I don't think what they had last year really worked on a level that they at least aspire to be. Is there some in-between move that could still be made that gets us to the point? Because I don't know. I just don't think I like the Dalton Connect pick. I like some of the other young guys that they have here. Maybe Austin Reeves plays a little bit better next year. Maybe Gabe Vincent gives them anything. But other than that, there isn't really much to bank on. And so I almost wonder could they just strike a balance somehow as opposed to going in either direction full bore?
I don't even know that they're leaning into the young core so much as they're just kind of saying that because it's all they've got. I don't see it as a philosophical change. I'll put it that way. I think they have some young players on the roster who they do want to invest in. That was more or less the case before. They just don't have a lot to offer. That's the issue. When you're pitching Klay Thompson as a free agent and he doesn't want to come play for you, that's a problem if you're the Lakers. That is your huge market advantage that you've been able to mine time and time again. And not only are we seeing that, they've been pitching veteran head coaches to come be on JJ Redick's staff and been getting turned down. There are lots of people who are just kind of looking at the Lakers situation and thinking, you know what, maybe not for me. I'm gonna leave that over to the side. I'm gonna let them do their thing, and I'm gonna respectfully take this job in media or go play for the Dallas Mavericks or do whatever it is that they want to do that doesn't come with some of the noise and some of the pressures that comes with both being a Laker and with being LeBron James's teammate.
By the way, just so people understand, right? The Lakers, there were signing trades out there to get done. DeMar DeRozan, say, as an example. And, they would have been hard capped or whatever. They would have had to move some salary. They would have had to do work of managing a roster. But they would have had to do that. Like, doing that would take, like, actually believing in those moves as things you absolutely need to do. And clearly, all the parties involved don't feel that way. No matter what LeBron is saying publicly about, he lets it leak like his list of people that he's going to take a pay cut for and blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is LeBron really wanted something done outside of the Clay thing, which we can get back into with the Clay. But, like, if he really wanted something done in terms of Jonas Valanciunas being on the team, the Lakers could have got it done. Okay? Obviously...
You think they can compete with the Wizards?
Right. Obviously, LeBron seems to be using his influence in the organization in other directions. And so, and I think that's connected to why maybe a Klay Thompson turns down more money. Why big coaches don't want to come. Big name coaches don't want to come and be assistants to this thing. It just seems like their priorities are like in other directions that aren't like, let's be as good as possible to win as many games as possible during next season.
Yeah, maybe the writing's just on the wall, because the signs are pretty bad. The fact that LeBron didn't even seem like he had anywhere that made sense to go to. It wasn't like there were just these other suitors that he's turning down here. It wasn't even like a typical frothing at the mouth sort of LeBron free agency where it's like everyone was almost tired with the whole song and dance to when he opted out or even threatened free agency earlier in the summer. Everyone's like, eh. And now it's just like none of the options that he even wanted didn't seem like they were realistic options. It just almost feels like this is getting progressively sadder than I expected it to be, because I think the Lakers are probably better at this stage of LeBron's career than it would be for any other approximate Hall of Fame caliber guy, right?
Sure.
Even late career, some of the other Hall of Famers that we've known and loved. Kobe, prime example, right? They were barely getting by and they were functionally soft tanking. But it's just, this is just ultimately becoming a mismatch of mid-tier veterans and young guys and LeBron James. And so I'm just having a hard time processing what the Lakers are at this moment.
I don't think it's that hard because it's the same thing that they've been for 2 or 3 years now, which is a pretty good, ultimately play-in level team. That's what they are and what they're going to be.
And also, we have to separate what the Lakers and LeBron. These are two separate entities. Whether we like it or not, LeBron sees himself as some brand business unto itself. And I think he's making decisions with that in mind, which is not to say Bron's not going to go out there and kill himself to win for the Lakers next year. He's going to. But the bottom line is, if LeBron was putting winning, championships, and the pursuit of championships above everything else, he would not be resigning with the Lakers right now. He would have forced his way to another team. And by the way, he could have gotten paid. There's ways to do this shit. We don't have to pretend that, the only way a free agent gets paid is to move into somebody's cap space. There's ways to get, Utah and all of their cap space involved in a sign and trade. Get a third team involved. There's ways to do all of this stuff. LeBron clearly doesn't want to do that. He wants to be in LA.
Yeah.
He wants to film his movie, because y'all know he's doing a little Last Dance thing.
He can do that anywhere. You can move the crew around.
He's had camera crews following for 3 years. He wants to make sure that's fire.
I thought you were talking about Save the Last Dance for some reason. I was like, is LeBron in another movie? I swear to God, I'm not even joking.
I would watch the fuck out of that. Can we get Save the Last Dance remake with LeBron?
If LeBron said, I'm forcing my way to New York, I'm forcing my way to Philly, I'm forcing, it would have happened. It would have happened if teams like got the sense that LeBron would be committed to a championship pursuit with them. They would have pursued it. But everybody got the hint. Nah, he's in LA. He's chilling. He's getting his son drafted. He's making movies. He's a media mogul. That's what he's doing. And that's what you're seeing with the Lakers. That's why it feels a little confusing.
Well, and part of the reason teams were getting that impression and reading those messages and tea leaves from him was once it became clear that the Lakers were willing to draft Bronny in the second round, that was kind of that as far as the LeBron free agency part of it went.
It's over.
You know?
Yeah, it's just a little more late season Mad Men than I was expecting, where everyone's just like, oh, like working isn't the most important thing. Like, what else do I have in my life?
This is very telling about you, Justin.
I don't disagree. I definitely understand where he's at. But I guess this is probably as good a transition as any to get into the Warriors side of thing here, because Steph isn't quite at that point. But he may be just as boxed into this weird in-between zone as LeBron is now, because the Warriors, after basically shoving Klay Thompson off the boat unceremoniously, have made a string of transactions that I think you can only describe as like mildly intriguing. They get D'Anthony Melton on the mid-level exception, like that deal, right? 1-year deal. Seems like a solid addition. Kyle Anderson, $27 million over 3 years in a signing trade. Feels like a pretty typical Warriors type of guy, ball mover, smart player, like always felt like a Warriors type of guy. Okay. Buddy Hield might come in a signing trade. We'll see. That hasn't confirmed, but that's in the mix there. Also hired Terry Stotts and Jerry Stackhouse, the Terry and Jerry buddy comedy that no one knew that they needed, but I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely.
Bruce Frazier going to the back of the bench all of a sudden, which is very sad and almost like a changing of the guard that I wasn't expected. But like, I don't hate all of these moves. It's just, it feels strange. And so I have to ask again, Rob, like, what's going on here?
I mean, I think we unpacked a lot of it with the Klay situation. And once Chris Paul was waived, once those two things happen, there's only so much that the Warriors can realistically do, with the exceptions that they have at their disposal. And getting D'Anthony Melton for the mid-level is a good bit of business.
Really good player.
Really good two-way player, a wing who's going to fit what the Warriors do and how they play. He's going to be really important for them defensively in particular, picking up a wide range of players, but I would think a lot of lead guards. I like all the guys that they are getting / might potentially get. It just doesn't probably take them anywhere. And this is, I think, what we're crystallizing is there is a clear point of demarcation between the top tier or two in the West and all of these teams, like the Warriors, like the Lakers, maybe even the Suns are in this category as they kind of continue to fill out their roster and shore up some of their weaknesses. All of these sort of also-ran type teams in the West are going to be bumping up against a different kind of ceiling, a different kind of like almost a hard cap in terms of personnel. If you can't make dramatic changes, you're just not really going to be that competitive with the Thunder and the Wolves and the Mavs and the Nuggets. Like those are really good, really stacked teams. And it's going to take more than D'Anthony Melton to get there, respectfully.
They got in on the Paul George sweepstakes. It didn't work out. They seriously pursued it. There was mutual interest. It didn't work out, and they moved on. Like at the end of the day, you can't just pull a rabbit out of a hat, guys. Like we know who the impact players in the NBA are. If there's no avenue to bring one in, then you go about doing the business of being an actual NBA team, and you improve again incrementally and on the margins. But yes. Have they improved it? I guess if you're the biggest Warriors optimist, like a Ben Cruz, you might say to yourself, hey, listen, Draymond maybe might not go psychopath next year. We'll have our full complement of players all year long. The young guys, Moody, Kuminga. Kuminga took a leap last year. Maybe he'll take another one this year. Trace Jackson Davis, you can be optimistic. But do we think they're going to be at the upper echelon of the West? Of course not.
Yeah, it's almost like they pivoted to all of the guys that like they've had interest over the years. Like, oh, maybe they just didn't have a high enough draft pick. And so they're almost like living the life that they couldn't when they were a top tier, like we only signed superstar level of team. I guess this probably brings us to the Lauri Markkanen sweepstakes because he is kind of the last big mover on the chessboard here, unless you want to count like Brandon Ingram or maybe DeMar DeRozan, who's still out there in free agency, Miles Bridges too, I guess. But it seems like a lot of teams are almost like putting a lot of stock if they are going to go out and swing a big move in Markkanen. What do you guys think about him in Golden State? Because on the one hand, I'm like, if this becomes a horse race, do the Warriors really have the assets in order to go out and get him? On the other hand, I guess you could argue Warriors draft picks far out and away might have more value than even a team that's willing to provide you with several of those. So I don't know. I guess it would take mortgaging the future, Rob, in order to bring Markkanen to Golden State. Is he the type of guy you think would be worth doing it?
So this is the tension. From the perspective of trying to maximize the remaining years of one of the best players to ever play the game in Steph Curry, the answer is obviously yes. You do whatever it takes to honor a player like that who's been with your franchise the whole way. Makes all the sense in the world. Will Lauri Markkanen alone put you within this contending class or near the top of it? Probably not. And I say that as someone who really likes Lauri. And I think part of the reason we talk about him so much is he is a great fit for so many different teams. Like the level of shooting and size and mobility that he has is immensely valuable. It's just that the Warriors have so many problems. It's not like you can't just plug in Lauri Markkanen and fix everything that's going weird or wrong with that team or all the ways in which they're lacking right now. They need size. They need ball handling. They need playmaking. They need somebody who's going to be able to play minutes when Draymond Green loses his mind. They need all of these things at once, and Lauri can give you some of that in shades, but maybe not enough. And that's where, as a front office or as a team, you start to get a little precious about what the idea of your future can be, even knowing that you want to do right by Steph.
I think Lauri would be an excellent Warrior, but he wouldn't make them good enough to be in the top tier because what they're mainly missing is people who can create themselves for themselves and others outside of Steph. And last year, because Andrew Wiggins is now, comatose / on a milk carton, whichever, metaphor you want to use, they were counting on Kuminga. They were counting on a clearly diminished Klay Thompson. They were counting on a rookie Podziemski. Like, they were counting on these guys in big spots to try to create for themselves and others outside of what Steph, the huge burden he's already carrying. And Lauri, for all of his strengths, that's not really his bag. He's beautiful at working off of others, at not needing to soak up the bulk of a bunch of possessions in terms of dribbling and all of this stuff and isolating and stuff. And again, that stuff would be very useful in the Golden State Steve Kerr system.
Totally.
But I don't think it would take them to the stratosphere.
Yeah, a 7-foot version of Klay who can attack off the dribble against a closeout and actually finish and dunk inside. That would look beautiful. I just don't know if it takes them as far as they need to go.
Yeah, I thought the most telling thing in the reported Paul George discussions was that they held tough on Kuminga in large part because they wanted to have enough left over for when Paul George came there.
Yeah.
And I think that is the crucial thing with the Warriors. It's like, yeah, they actually have some pretty intriguing young guys like Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, Kuminga, Moody. Like, I don't think this is the two timeline track that they had hoped for, but they have a cadre of young guys that are probably more intriguing than, for instance, like what the Lakers have that have proven more. But if you trade all of those guys, then what's left around to play with Steph other than Lauri Markkanen and Draymond Green? And honestly, is like kind of the flip side of bringing Draymond back. Like, he provides so much for that defense, but the fact that he's practically a one-way player at this point outside of what he does and kind of the ballet with Steph and the handoffs, like, it really kind of hamstrings them because he had to be one of the foundational guys left over there. So I don't know. I don't think a big move really works when you actually do the math of it all.
This is where the chain of events that either starts with the Draymond Green punch or maybe it goes even further back than that, really just kills the Warriors. Like trading Jordan Poole for Chris Paul and having to give up even more stuff to make that happen, and then not trading Chris Paul for anything and letting his contract expire, and then not re-signing or signing, trading, or flipping Klay Thompson ahead of time for anything and letting him expire. That, like, all of those moves colliding is what leads the Warriors into exactly the predicament you're talking about, Justin, where they do have good young guys, but they are, it turns out, very instrumental to what they do. And they almost cannot give them up if they want to maintain a full, complete team.
Yeah, and it's some self-awareness too, which I appreciate, right? When it's like, all right, we want to get in for Paul George. Paul George is 33 now. I hate to break it to people. He is not this on-ball, kill you guy anymore. He's just not that. He can create space, at like 17 feet. He's still huge and long, and like he creates a little bit of separation against a one-on-one. He can pretty efficiently make a nice mid-ranger, slightly contested. He can make some tough shots. He's obviously a great shooter, all of that, but Paul George don't turn the corner on people anymore when he gets downhill. Like, his finishing at the basket is not incredible. So, like, it's an awareness that, like, man, if we don't even got Kuminga to supplement this stuff in terms of after Steph, who gets to do this? Paul George is not it. Now, let's say in some alternate universe, right, the Boston Celtics had flamed out in the playoffs and Jaylen Brown was suddenly on the market. Oh, yeah. Jaylen Brown, still in his 20s, still cooking people. Like, let's get Kuminga in there. Let's blah, blah, blah. Let's whatever. Fuck it. Like, it's Jaylen Brown. But, Paul George at 30-something, like some of the guys that come up, these guys ain't going to move the needle and just mortgage the rest of your future completely for them. Knowing damn well, like, you could look Steph in the eye and be like, this dude ain't going to change our fortunes. Like, we know this. And so I think they're playing it smart too.
I think this is an important point that we need to clarify as far as all of the apron mayhem and terror that's going around. I don't know that any of us on this podcast are advocating for teams in the Warriors position, for example, to run headfirst at the second apron. If you are not fundamentally good enough, the spending isn't really the issue. The teams that we are concerned with as far as the apron goes are teams like the Nuggets, where that's a very good roster already in hand. It doesn't take a lot of reimagining to think about how you might get back into a championship series. The Warriors have to do reimagining. The Lakers will have to do reimagining. Those are teams that probably should not be hard charging into the aprons if they can avoid it, and yet the Lakers kind of have.
The Warriors, I think, is the worst situation just because Steph is a few years younger and thus has still this runway to be competing at a high level. The fact that he is not on the same level as some of the title contending teams in the West is a goddamn shame. And I guess it's a personal decision at a certain point whether or not you want to stick it out with one team your entire career. I personally don't really see why it would be such a big deal for someone to just like finish 2 to 3 years down the road with another team, but he seems, unlike virtually any star we've seen since probably Dirk, just resigned to the fact that he will not ask out. And maybe the people in the Bay love him for that, but like, goddamn, it's a shame because he should be like, we should be talking about him like joining forces with Nikola Jokic or something right now.
I want to take some time out to appreciate Steph in a way because, the recent Caitlin Clark stuff has made me laugh because all of the people who are allied against this notion that, this is actually a special player, like the hype around her is based on what she's doing on the court and it's incredible, actually remind me of myself at the beginning of the Steph phenomenon. I was very annoyed by it. I remember Steiny Mo, my man. I love Steiny Mo. I remember hearing him talk about how I introduced my kid to Steph. It was cool. My kid was geeked, blah, blah, blah. He's like, and I just remember him saying I don't know, the guy's relatable. And I don't know why that stuck in my craw. And I was like, what, Chris Paul isn't relatable? It was It was ridiculous. But like as the years go by, I've realized that like I was wrong. Like Steph is actually special. There is something special about the way he is managing his career, the way he's managing his brand, as disgusting as it is to say that. Like there is something special about it. And I do think it has to do that he wasn't some cherry picked since he was 12 years old, child prodigy messiah, like frankly a lot of these dudes in the NBA. And you could tell by how they carry themselves. Steph is just like more normal. Yes, he grew up with a millionaire parent. Yes, I get that, but he didn't do the crazy AAU circuit. He didn't go to some big time college program. He wasn't picked by one of the shoe companies from an early on age. And I think that makes him have different basketball values. So the fact that he's not, sort of chasing rings and chasing attention and chasing this, I can't really be mad. This is like sort of the downside of having the great, wholesome basketball story is that he's not being completely cynical about his career, man. Like it's kind of, for me, I take the good with the bad in that.
And maybe that's the reason that you do chase a trade for someone like Lauri to begin with, is not because it's going to make you an immediate title contender.
But it makes Steph happier.
It makes Steph happier, and it gives him something to play for. Like we were talking about LeBron and his priorities and what he is valuing at this point in his career. For Steph, if retiring a Warrior is something he wants to do, and it seems very much like it is, he even mentioned it in his kind of parting message to Klay Thompson on social media that they didn't get to finish this thing out together, which is a genuine shame that those two guys didn't get to kind of ride off into the sunset as teammates. But if he wants to stay a Warrior, improving his quality of life is an incredibly meaningful thing and a meaningful gesture to just the most important player in the history of your franchise, not to mention one of the best ever play.
So if the Warriors don't get in on the Lauri sweepstakes, or if they don't win it, I do want to talk about what the Jazz are doing here, because I have them on my list of confusing teams as well, because so far they have oodles of cap space, I think around 40 million, just under that. And the only moves that they've made thus far are they signed Drew Eubanks for 2 years at 10 million.
Yep, got to do it.
Got to do it. They waived Omer Yurtseven, which I'm doing the cross right
peace,
now,
yeah.
and I'm just boring one out. Rest in peace. And they are reportedly in sign-and trade talks to send Chris Dunn to the Clippers. So I have to pull out my Brian Windhorst fingers right here and wonder what's going on here, because with Eubanks, this is what they have in terms of bigs. They have Walker Kessler. They have John Collins, who, God, he's going to stick in the league for 20 years and no one's going to know what he actually did in it. Eubanks. Our man Philip Kowski, who I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about in recent days. Hendricks, the recent draft pick, and Lauri Markkanen. So that's a crowded front court with a lot of money left to do. And so I have to wonder, like, what's going on with Danny Ainge here?
See, I wouldn't take any of that to mean that there is a Lauri Markkanen sweepstakes necessarily. The Jazz have shown they are perfectly willing to play Markkanen with Collins and another big, whether that's Kessler or Olynyk or whoever they have on hand. So just because they got a lot of bodies, I don't think is nudging Markkanen out the door. But the broader question of what the Jazz are doing is something we have been wrestling with for now 2 full seasons and change. Trying to figure out, like, what is the direction of this team? To what extent is Lauri going to be a part of it? Or is he kind of the avenue toward turning the page and resetting things a little bit?
He's the avenue.
It kind of feels that way just because he's getting to that point in his career where, like, he's ready to be competing for high-level playoff series and actual games of meaning right now. And when the Jazz do kind of want to accelerate, it's still going to take them a couple years to get up to speed. I just don't know when they are going to actually put the pedal to the metal on that. We've seen no indication that they are surging forward in any way. Have we seen anything, Waz?
No. So I think what they're doing is kind of similar to the OKC thing. What you're seeing with the cap space, I think they're just renting it out, getting picks. Somebody's going to need to use this cap space eventually. Some team that has actual pursuits will rent it out, get picks, probably use that thing that we rented it out for to get more picks. A la, Al Horford in Oklahoma City that turns into Kemba Walker, that turns into more picks and more picks and more picks, right? I think that's
Kemba Walker, by the way.
Rest in peace. Yeah, my guy, man. CHSAA legend. He's finally retired. He's one of the last of the Mohicans in terms of impactful New York City basketball players. It makes me really sad, honestly. But yeah, it seems like, look, they've told people like, yo, I think it was Zach Lowe that was like, after they saw the Miles, not Miles, the Mikal Bridges. The Mikal Bridges trade, they called teams like, hey, yo, if y'all want to do that for Lauri, it's there. Like, we're ready. We want to do that. I think they're just taking their time with it. And I think it has to do, I made that joke about Popovich and Buford's job security. It's the same shit with Ainge. Like, they're not going anywhere. They're firmly entrenched in terms of their power in Utah, so they can be as judicious as they want to be. The only confusing thing to me is that they refuse to get into the Wemby sweepstakes. That was just weird. Or maybe it was just like, look, we're not rushing into that. But like, they just refuse to get in on the guy that everybody said was going to be the future of the league. That just seems weird to me. But other than that, everything else makes all the sense in the world.
You mean the fact that they didn't hardcore tank in order
they didn't do it fast
be in
enough.
Position to,
yeah,
right. Yeah, it's weird. I think something is going to happen. Maybe it isn't Markkanen, or at least it doesn't have to be Markkanen, but this is a lot of bigs. And I think if like you were building a team around Markkanen, I think you would at least try to find a pathway for him to play more 4 rather than trying to stick him at 3, which is what I think, Rob, you were suggesting that they were okay with doing. Like, yeah. So
I'm not saying they should, but they did.
Can I ask you guys something related to this?
Yeah.
Is there an in-between of the extremes of Utah and what they Utah and how OKC did it, what they were doing when they were bad and all their cap space, and what Detroit just did with Tobias Harris? Like, is there a nice threading the needle? And by Detroit, I mean like Tobias Harris is not worth any of that money. There's just no reason to do it. Like, they just literally just like, oh, let's spend our money on a vet. But it just like, it's not gonna help them in any material way. So I'm not saying Utah should go out and do Tobias Harris, but like, is there an in-between level here?
I think the in-between... Good.
Yeah, well, they also don't have to, because they weren't embarrassing enough that they have to go out and sign anyone. I think, to me, Harris is the hinky tax, where it's like you were so bad that you actually have to show that you're trying to be competitive to your bosses.
Yeah. There's a Colangelo running the Pistons right now.
I wouldn't doubt it, honestly.
I do think the middle ground is if you can find a player, a veteran in that range that maybe you have to overpay for slightly, but who is tradable. That's kind of the middle ground. Is this a player who would be attractive to a winning team and is on a deal that could make sense for a winning team? The Tobias Harris deal is not going to make sense for anyone who's trying to compete at a high level. They're just not going to have the money to ship back in a transaction like that. But if you can get a veteran on a mid-level deal on a reasonable contract who could help a contender, even as a 7th or 8th or 9th guy trying to make a playoff run, that could be the middle ground. I really don't know that the Jazz are looking to do all that much. Maybe we'll be shocked and maybe Lauri will be moved in short order. I see this as more of a long-term thing. And maybe he's more of a guy we look at the trade deadline yet again and say, our team's looking to get in on him at that point in time. But for what it is now, I see a lot of, can you get Walker Kessler fully back on track? Can you get Taylor Hendricks to be a meaningful part of this rotation? Like, what is the next step for Keontae George? What are you seeing for Cody Williams? Is there a route for him to have immediate playing time? Those are sort of the big questions for the Jazz to me, more than, are we going to see a Lauri Markkanen trade in the next 2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah, I think if they push on a Markkanen trade, I think it's more about taking advantage of the market at this point, because it does feel like there are a couple teams that really want to make that one move to get into that elite tier of their conferences. I'm talking about like the Kings. I'm talking about like the Rockets. There are these teams that are the Pelicans, for instance, that are on the rise and feel like they've been like in that in-between zone for a little too long. And I almost wonder if this coming after the Bridges trade is more opportunism, because it does feel like Lauri can swing the fortunes of some of those sorts of teams. And so Danny Ainge always wanting to like really make the most of someone else's suffering. I could definitely see those things aligning here. Do any of those teams like interest you as a Lauri destination? Like, oh man, if he's with the Kings and we're just like aggregating every intriguing Eastern European guy, like now we're getting back to the glory days. I kind of actually like that.
Wait, are we including Finland as Eastern Europe?
Where would you say it is?
I mean, it's Scandinavia, no?
Yeah, Scandinavia, boy. Come on now, there's Vikings.
I didn't know if we were being that specific. I don't have my globe out here.
We're always being that specific. But
well, it's because most of the good Euros are Eastern European. Well, the ones who aren't black anyway.
There's no doubt.
Apologies to our Scandinavian overlords at Spotify.
But look, that's the thing about the Mikal Bridges trade. If you want to get that kind of return, who are like, I don't know a lot about the like late teens Arizona Wildcats. Did Lauri Markkanen have a bunch of beloved college teammates I don't know about who are going to push for him to get 5 firsts in a potential deal? I think there's lots of teams that could use Lauri Markkanen, to what we discussed earlier. I just don't know that there's the urgency that you got from the Mikal Bridges deal of a team that I think there's a different urgency between the sort of listlessness you're describing among teams like the Pelicans, for example, versus the Knicks seeing themselves as being on the cusp of something and wanting to get that started as soon as possible. The Pelicans are looking for changes, but I don't know that they're looking for this level of change.
I think everybody's wet dream was OKC. And I think for good reason. I think the complexity of OKC is how poor the franchise is as far as terms of cash. And this guy is due for a raise pretty soon. Like Chet Holmgren is already in his 3rd NBA season. Shea's already been paid. It won't be long until J-Dub, like, you know, I think they're trying to do stuff on this quick timeline, but I think Lauri could have fit into the quick timeline too. I don't know, man. I think to preserve the 5-out nature of the team, I would have rather them go out and get Lauri than address the size issue, honestly. And just been like, you know what? We're going to make shots this year. And that's what's going to make the difference. And we went out and got Lauri instead of getting Hartenstein, which shores up the size issue, the rebounding issue, and stuff like that. Leaning into the offense in the 5-out, I think would have been more fun, would have been more bold, more daring. But, you know, basically, you know, a 2-year deal, very judicious with the Hartenstein. I respect it, though.
I don't think it's just Hartenstein, too. I think it's a combination of him and Caruso. Because the deal, like the way to get Lauri I would imagine, have to involve, if not J-Dub, someone like Josh Giddey, who is now no longer a member of the Oklahoma City Thunder.
And then you're not giving up J-Dub in a Lowry deal. Yeah. That's not happening.
You should not.
I liked what OKC did. We can talk about the West a little bit later, but I think they're probably the team to beat in that conference at this point. What do you guys think about the Rockets for Lauri? They're a team that like has suggested that they really want to make an upgrade for whatever reason, but do you think he fits? Because they also have a lot of young guys to contort to whatever superstar or star, or whatever you want to call them, in there. You know, it's like they can get a big and just trade out some of the younger bigs. They can get a guard, they can trade out some of the younger guards.
I think what you're asking us is, do we believe in Jabari as a 5?
Yeah, kind of.
Because Markkanen and Şengün, I don't think I want that as my 4-5 combination defensively. That's not what I'm looking for. But if you think what we saw from the end of the season run from the sort of smaller ball Rockets could be a real thing, then the way to get Amen Thompson real consistent minutes is the combination of Lauri and Jabari, right? That kind of spacing from your bigs, if Jabari can be a real anchor of a defense, that could be amazing for the sort of spacing and alignment that the Rockets seem to need. But that might be giving up on Şengün too early, a guy who I think is a really good and really talented player.
I have a question for you guys in terms, because the Jabari at the 5 thing doesn't pass the smell test.
It doesn't move me personally.
Because I gotta ask you, because even your smallest 5s, to be credible, you gotta be at least as good at defense as 40-year-old Al Horford. Do we think Jabari can be as good on defense as Al Horford was at his age this year? in the playoffs? Because I think that's like the basement of center defense, man.
You think Al Horford is the basement of center defense?
If you want to be a serious team. Not in the NBA.
Al Horford's still a really good defender.
No, I'm not talking about in the NBA to be competent. I'm talking about if you want to be a championship level team, I think Al Horford this year in the playoffs is as bad as you can be in terms of his size, his rim protection, his mobility. Like, that's as bad a combination as you could get and still be a serious championship level team. Like Jabari Smith at center?
I think
I feel like you're being
the problem.
You're being a little uncharitable to NBA champion Al Horford.
No, I'm saying like the basement of championship contention is very high.
That is
what
true.
I'm saying.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
Al is at the basement of what it takes to win championships. But that shit, like, dude, that's a really crazy height to reach.
I think the problem is the Jabari stuff is so interconnected with the Jalen Green stuff, where I do feel like Şengün moving out just opened things up for the both of them because they're playing a slightly different style of basketball that empowers them to be more who they are.
Yeah.
And I don't know if either direction necessarily points them toward title contention. So they are in a real like Faustian bargain here. So I don't know which way to go. And it almost feels like they need a trade to push them in one of those directions.
It couldn't hurt in terms of just getting some clarity in that building. But you're right. Like these bets are conditional on one another. Betting on Jabari is also betting on Jalen Green, which is not something that I'm eager to do at this point in time. Going in the other, like even if you were to say trade Şengün but keep Jalen Green and bring in someone like Lauri and Jalen Green strike me as two players who do not have a lot of on-court chemistry or would not have a lot of on-court chemistry. Their games are not very collaborative in terms of style. This is the problem you run into with the Rockets. They have a lot of talent. They have a lot of veteran talent and young talent at the same time.
A lot of guys that I like individually.
A lot of guys over there. Perhaps,
a lot of guys.
Perhaps too many guys, as we often come to at this point in the season. And so whether now or later, they are a natural trade candidate for a lot of different teams for that reason. Whatever your vision of what the Rockets should be, they do need to clarify it.
Also, Faustian bargain was not what I was reaching for. I think I meant Sophie's choice.
That's tough. Faust and Sophie, they have a lot in common.
That's true. Listen, it's the middle of the summer. I'm dealing with a head cold. We'll get there eventually, guys.
What is the Rockets' Faustian bargain, do you think?
Jalen Green being a superstar.
Like that's what they're selling their soul for, or maybe did.
Yeah. No, that's what they would have to.
Well, maybe that's what happened in April. Like Tillman Fertitta sold his soul. Jalen Green became a superstar, and here we are. We're living in that reality now.
Let's go. I'm with that reality. By the way,
the last team I have on the list here, Milwaukee Bucks, who really didn't have many options, and so they haven't done much as a result. DeLon Wright, they signed. Seems like classic Bucks signing of a guy who was interesting 2 years ago and just ends up, let's take a flyer to see if he could reprise that. I think the most interesting thing with the Bucks is like the Brook Lopez chatter seems to be ongoing. Seems like if they want to make any sort of meaningful upgrade, he might be the path to do so. Reported Lakers interest, yada, yada. Do you see that as a more viable alternative this year than it has been in years past?
I don't. I really think the Bucks have to bank on the idea that their roster can play significantly better than it did last season. Like, they have to have a belief that they can just be better. That can be the adjustment. That can be the upgrade. We're just better than we were last year. I don't know how. Like, how could it be possible that Brook Lopez brings back a group of players or a player that somehow unlocks what's already within this team? I think it's about Chris Middleton's health and just a more sound approach to hoop. I don't know that it can be anything else, quite frankly. Giannis coming back healthy, Middleton being healthier, and them just playing like an actual NBA team, man.
I think we also need to adjust our expectations for the Bucks timeline too. Yes, Brook Lopez is, on the older side of his career. But really, Milwaukee has to prove a lot this season, right? Giannis is committed to them, but not indefinitely. And you're going to need to show that you're closer to contending than you were a year ago. Some of that is Chris Middleton's health, as you said, Waz. Some of that is just getting meaningfully better, cleaning stuff up in terms of the coaching. Some of it is Dame playing meaningfully better than he did last year. Mm-hmm. I just don't think if you trade Brook for even a player who's, let's say, theoretically at Brook's level or slightly better, and who plays a different position or plays that same position differently, you're going to have to reintegrate them from the start of the season. You're going to go through a similar degree of growing pains all year as you did last year with Dame. The continuity of what Giannis and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez have together is part of what is going to make the Bucks good. And to bail on that for, I think what at best would be a lateral move, what probably would be a step down, strikes me as very short-sighted.
Yes. After a year of start and stops where you change things practically every 2 months, why would you go out and ruin the continuity that you've built even in that short amount of time? I tend to agree here. I think it really comes down to more, is Brook valuable on a market where a lot of teams seem like they need a big who can shoot? And so if you needed a plug and play guy like that and protect the rim, I think he is kind of an instant floor raiser for a lot of different teams. The Pelicans, prime example. If they can't get enough shooting in there, I think he makes a lot of sense there. And I think that the flip side is the kind of the conversation we've been dancing around for a season or two. It's like, does Giannis at the 5, for instance, make them a little bit different now? Or the fact that you have Dame, can you divert some of your capital in terms of cap space to more of a wing defender and does that make them a better team? I think it's more about like who the Bucks are under Doc more so than what Brook is even.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about even which wing defenders they would get. And if you told me they could have gotten in on the Alex Caruso conversation, that's a level of wing defender who could change some things for them. And a guy who can actually hit some shots, at least recently has been able to hit some shots. If you're just trading Brook Lopez, who we should say last season had basically an all defense caliber season, for another decent level wing defender, that's not changing anything about your team. And putting that much on Giannis defensively, I just don't think is that realistic over the course of a full regular season. And this is why the fact that the Bucks right now cannot use the full mid-level exception is kind of a problem, because doing so would put them over the second apron. They're in that even the full taxpayer mid-level exception, I believe, would put them over the second apron. So they're in this kind of middle ground where they can't actually add players. Trading the guys who they have who are good could pull them a step backwards. And maybe the most confusing part, they just had the 23rd and the 33rd pick in the draft, and they picked 2 teenagers.
Yeah.
Are we sure that AJ Johnson is not a couple of kids stacked up on each other in a trench coat? Like, how confident are we in that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you gotta, in the draft, get players that you think are actually gonna be good. I like this idea that you get old dudes because they're NBA ready. I just don't buy.
I'm not saying old dudes. I'm saying maybe not literal children.
That's fair.
Especially with Doc as their coach. Like, do we
Doc
need to
hates
reprise like the
oh my God, he hates
Andre
the
Jackson
kids.
just
Hates
getting
them.
splinters in his butts? Yeah, I don't know. So we'll keep an eye on the Bucks here. I want to talk about the Mavs because I think they're quietly killing the offseason. So they lose Derek Jones Jr., who was obviously a huge part of them making to the finals last year. But they bring in Clay in a sign-in trade, win the Clay sweepstakes. So that's something, considering that they haven't won a free agent sweepstakes in, God, who knows how long. Chandler Parsons, perhaps. I mean, I guess you could add Kyrie, but he was their own free agent. So that seems like a pretty significant marker in just their trajectory. I also think like their totality of transactions is kind of pretty impressive. So they bring in Quentin Grimes for Tim Hardaway Jr. in 3 seconds. Love Quentin Grimes. I think he might end up being a starter for this team. We'll see. And then they bring in Najee Marshall. You don't think so?
I think Klay Thompson might have some different opinions about that.
Yeah, I think that is the big sticking point here. I would assume Klay is going to start to begin with, and I wonder if by the end of the season they'll realize what the Warriors realize, and like he's very valuable, but just to a certain extent.
I think they won't have to realize that till the playoffs. In the regular season, where teams like are gonna have to devote multiple resources to stopping Luka and Lively in the pick and roll, Clay's gonna be open. Or if he's not, other people are gonna be their offense is going to be made better by having non-dribble threat, non-one-on-one threat Klay Thompson on it, like in the regular season. In the playoffs, I think Klay's, he has to guard threes. He can even guard some fours, but can't rebound, isn't a dribble threat. But like those problems will rear their head in the postseason. But in the regular season, it's going to be just fine. And I think they're going to be a much better regular season team for it. They're probably going to threaten for the number 1 seed this year because of how strong they'll be in the regular season. I think Klay as this 30-something minute a game playoff guy, I ain't seeing it.
Sure. I was going to get to this point, but I think my big prediction for the Mavs is Quentin Grimes or Najee Marshall will be, if not starting by the end of the season, but definitely in their best lineup. I can actually see Marshall supplanting Washington even as a go-to 4, if only because Washington's shooting has kind of come and gone there. But I love those signings, and for somehow they've managed to upgrade on what was already a really deep, intriguing group of wing players, especially if you throw Exum in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out Nico Harrison is pretty damn good at this.
Yeah.
Both the taking a calculated swing on someone like Kyrie, who we all had our questions about at the time and has turned out to pay off really well for them, but also filling out the roster. Last season, getting Derek Jones Jr., getting Dante Exum. This year, coming up with this complete renovation of the supporting cast in terms of the wing talent that the Mavs have at their disposal. They're going to have options, and I think they're probably going to have to get a little bit more comfortable playing PJ at the 5 on a semi-consistent basis, or at least matchup-dependent basis, to make use of all these guys that they have. I would love to see some more of those sorts of looks, and it's gonna depend on Luka rebounding at a pretty high level. It's going to depend on Najee Marshall not just being a physical on-ball defender, but also rebounding like a big. Those are kind of the variables that come with playing someone like PJ at the 5. But I think they can get away with some of that. And I think they can get away with it because this group is talented, is capable. It's going to demand a little more attention on the perimeter than Derek Jones and Josh Green did. And that's where whatever Klay's limitations may be, and there are many, especially at his price point and his level of reputation and what he expects of himself and his role. But he's going to demand a ton of attention on the perimeter, and he's going to completely change the way the teams try to guard the Mavs. It's just a different problem and formula than even the team that just made it to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, the best switch heavy teams in the playoffs are still going to have a nice time guarding Klay Thompson. Luka's definitely still going to have to be a switch buster come playoff time. But again, in the regular season, Klay Thompson is going to feast. And also, from what I understand, part of the calculation, Michael Thompson was begging this guy to come play for the Lakers, his father.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah.
He got offered more money to go play for the Lakers, but he's on a revenge tour. He wanted to join a team that he thinks can win the championship. And guess what? They just came from the finals, right? I think he's going to be highly motivated. And I think he'll be pretty adaptable, too. I don't think he's going to be whatever. He's on a mission to show that, I still got something. And, I'm on a team that's ready to compete for a championship ASAP.
I want to say another thing about Klay, too, as it relates to the switching defenses and really this kind of pervasive idea that he's going to be a standstill, park in the corner kind of shooter alongside Luka Doncic that I've seen bubbling up already. The Mavs have tried, and I repeat, tried and did run a lot of motion action for Tim Hardaway Jr. over the years. He's just Tim Hardaway Jr. And there are some nights where he would pop off for 30, and there's some nights where he'd go 0 for on 10 attempts. I'm not saying Klay Thompson isn't going to have bad shooting nights, but the level of threat projection that you're talking about, even if the Mavs just run the same stuff that they have run going back 3 or 4 seasons now, will be incredibly effective with Klay Thompson as a part of it. Just simple, Spain pick and roll or kind of 3-man orchestrations with a pick and roll plus Klay kind of mucking things up or challenging the judgment of the defenders in those situations. It's obviously easier if it's a more conventional look with the big who gets caught in that mix. But even if teams are trying to switch all of that stuff, it's going to get really murky and really complicated as they try to figure out, wait, am I supposed to go up with Klay Thompson as he flares up to the top of the floor, one of the best shooters to ever live? Or do I need to stay here in the hope that I am the only line of defense against Luka Doncic driving to the basket? Like, those problems are going to present themselves in ways that are much more complicated than Klay on the weak side.
Yeah, I kind of sped through the Klay aspect of it because, like a fucking blogger, I just wanted to talk about Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall. But but I do think the Klay signing was pretty impressive. He still shot 39% from three on 9 attempts per game last year. Like, there are levels to where he is. He is not the version that we are used to seeing. And I also feel like freeing himself of that is going to lead a lot more people to appreciate what he can still provide, which is lights out shooting, unlike we've seen probably in NBA history outside of some of the other guys that he played with in Golden State. And so, like, the fact that the Mavs can use him in a variety of ways and maybe aren't beholden to starting him, even, we'll see how that plays out, I think is just going to be to the benefit of him and the rest of the team.
So the thing about Klay, it's hard for me to divorce the best version of Klay from who he is now, because just for context, folks got to understand that, like, in 2016 against Russell Westbrook, who was the most athletic player probably in the NBA at that moment, Klay Thompson guarded this man on an island by himself, while also being somebody who could go off for 40 in a game 6 on 3 dribbles. Like, this dude was such a unique player, man. Like, that combination of what he could do to defenses with his shooting ability, his movement, and just shut down defensive player, you know, was just insane. And it's just, he's just not that anymore. But, like, the shooting part, make no mistake, this fool could still shoot the hell out of a basketball, man.
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot of offseason to go. I'll say it again, it's still day 4 of free agency, so we don't know. Sounds like Denver might load up and get Russell Westbrook in there, so we'll see. But it does feel like there's like a tier forming here where it's like OKC, Minnesota, Dallas seem to be on another level, at least on paper at this point in the offseason than all those other teams.
Yeah, Dallas, to put it in context, 50-win team last year with significant injuries. So with all of these improvements, and assuming that their guys, in particular Kyrie, can stay healthy more consistently, maybe that's an assumption and something that'll just like fall flat on its face. But if that is the case, I would expect them to be a dramatically better regular season team by all kind of metrics of performance, whether you want to look at wins, net rating, all that stuff.
When they made their trade, they got way better.
Also.
Like, that happened.
Took them a while to figure that out as well. Took a couple of weeks before they even starting the right guys. So, yeah, they're going to be sick next year. Do you guys lean one way over another team? I know it's still pretty early, but
I think OKC is probably on paper the most talented, especially when you consider the potential for their young guys to make great improvements as young guys are wont to do.
Yep.
But, you know, y'all know for me, I'm the old head, like the gray beard, man. Like, you got to go through it a few more times. Hell, Boston went to 6 conference finals before they could break through, okay? And so for that, I'm holding that against them as the youth. But on paper, like, when you talk about Chet and Shea and J-Dub and, you know, Caruso and Hartenstein and the Wiggins and Isaiah, like, Dort, like, this is crazy. The amount of legit NBA guys next to an MVP can't, like, you know, a guy who was on the cusp of all-star consideration in Chet, like, bruh, this is a crazy talented team. But, you know, young guys, I want to see it again. So I'll still give Dallas the light nudge over them.
That was kind of my question. Is I get the skepticism about younger teams in general, but there aren't a lot of like compelling cases, graybeard type cases out there, right? The Nuggets lost some of their greatest beards. Minnesota has to figure out a lot themselves. I'm inclined to lean OKC as far as the best team in the West right now. Number 1 seed in the West. They added elite perimeter talent on defense. They added a high-level rim protector. That series against Dallas was pretty damn close to begin with, and they got meaningfully better just as the Mavericks did. And they have a little bit of a a case to improve internally in a way that makes more sense. I know Derek Lively and guys like that are going to get better, but Chet Holmgren, Shea, like their whole young core, J-Dub and OKC, is going to take a meaningful step. And that's going to be a scary thing, whether they got Caruso or Hardenstein or not.
I would almost split the difference where the fact that OKC just augmented what it has by just getting kind of the perfect fits to round out that core with Hartenstein and then Caruso is kind of remarkable. And the fact that they did so without ever using a draft pick is just almost like a cherry on top. It's almost like a real fuck you from Sam Presti. I think the one thing is just obviously seeing Chet and J-Dub kind of push past whatever wall they hit for young players in the playoffs. And so for that reason, I would probably lean Mavericks right now, but I also think it's in them to do so. And I would not be shocked at all if they did that next season. So it's going to be a fun race in the West. Let's talk about, just before we go here, top of the East, because Donovan Mitchell was the big deal of 2 days ago when he signed his extension, 3 years, $150 million with a player option in year 3. I think the most interesting thing for us that came out of this is that Donovan Mitchell is functionally LeBron James for the Cavs. And by that, I mean, he just gets to do whatever he wants. This is the line in the ESPN Newser that I thought was really interesting. A significant part of Mitchell's belief in committing on a new deal comes with his and his representatives' confidence in the organization to keep building the Cavaliers into a championship contender and an alignment on a partnership of how they'll play a part in doing it together, sources said. And I guess what you could read into that word salad there is just Donovan Mitchell is going to have his way. And so it's kind of surprising that we've gotten here, but like, I don't know. I guess it's for the best if you've just traded so many goddamn picks and players to get to this point to begin with.
This is a good outcome for the Cavs. I know Donovan Mitchell is not the superstar of all superstars, but having Donovan Mitchell sure beats not having Donovan Mitchell. And if his input is something that is like having input on transactions, or I don't know to what extent he was in on Kenny Atkinson being the new head coach of the Cavs.
Do you think that's a good thing too?
I don't think it's a bad thing. Kenny Atkinson's a good coach.
Describe Waz's face, which is like he's doing the Rock's like eyebrow thing. Virtually all of Rob's points. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Look, I'm just glad that a star and a player can have, quote, an alignment on a partnership of how they'll play a part in doing it together, end quote. That's all. I'm excited to see people working together.
Look, yes, it's a good thing that the Cavs, you got to give shouts to Kobe Altman and his staff and crew for convincing Donovan Mitchell that staying with the team on another deal was a good idea.
Yes.
Shouts to them for getting Kenny Atkinson, who's a coach that I have a lot of respect for. Like, for what the work that he, not just his reputation, the work that he put in with Brooklyn. Those teams overachieved while he was coaching. There's no doubt about that. You know, I'm gonna always raise my eyebrow at the idea that guys who aren't Luka, Jokic, Giannis, Steph, LeBron level guys having organizational input. That's ridiculous to me. I'm sorry. Like, I don't see why I would give Devin Booker, a player who I love, a level of Devin Booker, like, yo, you get the run of my organization. Why?
Okay, I don't know that anyone is saying he gets the run of the organization.
But he's got organizational input.
He gets to file some memos. You know, we're going to take his opinions under advisement.
Okay.
It's technically an alignment on a partnership of how they'll play and doing it together.
That's exactly what it is.
No, I think that is the big question. How much is his influence going to lead to the changes throughout the rest of the roster? We're kind of at the point where we've reached Occam's razor with a lot of these teams. And I'm almost at the point where it's like, are we really trading Darius Garland at this point? First of all, who is trading for Darius Garland? It doesn't seem to be like a clear-cut fit unless you want to get into like the San Antonio thing, but they've kind of signaled that that's not what they're about right now. And I also wonder if you bring in Kenny Atkinson, who has been fairly creative as a coach, and I thought was kind of given the short shaft in Brooklyn when Kyrie and Katie wanted to change things up there. Like, do we give him half a season at the very least to maybe reimagine the partnership between Mitchell before we get rid of Garland? I mean, same thing with Mobley and Allen. Do we need to get rid of Allen, or can we just try to figure things out on the fly and then maybe do it at the deadline?
Can the new boss of the organization be convinced of an alternative way to play?
I don't know.
This is what I'm saying. Like,
you think you need to convince Donovan Mitchell to have the ball in his hands more?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think what would take them to the stratosphere would be him being better without the ball.
Well, sure.
You know,
I don't think anybody disagrees with you. The
I don't
Cavs
think
included.
Owners of organizations who aren't Steph Curry, basically player owners, they don't voluntarily do this kind of stuff. But you know, I've been wrong before. You know, God knows this playoffs I was.
I'm just not sure Donovan Mitchell has reached team governor status yet. I see this as a statement of value and of influence that is sure above and beyond other players on the team, for sure.
Above and beyond Jared Allen.
Is he running the place? I don't necessarily see it that way. And I agree with your overall framing, Justin, that you hire Kenny Atkinson, and part of the value in doing that is giving him some time to see what he can do with this same group of players, right? You're not making huge changes to the roster just yet. You're making changes to the way that those players are viewed and that their roles might be viewed and the ways they might be deployed. And maybe you can convince Donovan Mitchell to do a little bit more off ball or to play a different kind of role. And maybe you can find a capacity for the bigs to play together. Atkinson has coached Jared Allen before, is as familiar with his game and his skill set as anybody. And to trade Darius Garland now, frankly, even aside from the market, would just be trading low on a very talented point guard. So yeah, keep him, keep both of them as far as I'm concerned. See what you can do. Give it a couple months, and then we'll check in, as I'm sure we will many, many times throughout the season, to see what the Cavs are and should be doing.
They're just stuck in this nebulous zone where it's like you trade one, it just makes even more problems that would probably make me like them less, depending on what came back. Where it's like, I think Mobley probably should be playing 5 this year. But then it's like, are we going to really trot out a defensive lineup that includes Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and Evan Mobley at the 5? Like, it's a very small team to power through a regular season. As much as I like Mobley and think he's a potential, like, all defensive player of the year type of guy. He was already on the ballot 2 years ago.
He is that.
It's just like, that doesn't really work for me over the course of a full season. So, like, why not maybe take a half measure, play more lineups with it this year, and then go for it. But Mitchell's only here for another 3 years. Plus, and one of those is a player option. So there is a certain clock to it all. And so I'm having as hard a time in figuring them out as anyone. Why don't we wrap it there? The deafening silence.
We've been here. We've lived with these Cavs for a long time.
Yeah.
I think we're all familiar with their quandaries, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Why don't we wrap it there? Thank you to Eddie Ocampo, who's doing everything for us today, apparently. So we appreciate him stepping up as our franchise player. We'll be back on Sunday as per usual. We'll see you then.